and welcome to Advanced Identity Theft Responses, Financial Identity Theft, a webinar produced in partnership between the National Center for Victims of Crime and the FINRA Investor Education Foundation. Just a brief background information to make sure you're all aware of who we are. The FINRA Investor Education Foundation is an arm of the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, which, as you can see on the slide, is an independent non-governmental regulator that works with securities firms doing business with the public in the United States. The FINRA Investor Education Foundation does investor education and protection through the awarding of grants and managing of partnerships and projects with partners, of which the National Center for Victims of Crime is a partner. The National Center for Victims of Crime, who many of you may be familiar with, is there to forge a national commitment to help victims of crime rebuild their lives. The important thing to know about the National Center is that we're committed to working on behalf of all crime victims, whether that's violent crime, financial crime, property crime, or any other crime, to make sure that that folks have access to resources to recover, and that there's education, training, and evaluation for professionals who work alongside victims of crime, and to ensure that the public is aware that victims of crime have and deserve options for recovery from the traumatic events that victims often experience. The Financial Crime Resource Center is a recently created affiliate of the National Center, and it's designed to help victims of financial crime recover their assets and recover control of their lives. We partner with organizations throughout the United States to work with victims of fraud, identity theft, and other crimes, and we also work and advocate for fair compensation and restitution for all crime victims, regardless of the perceived severity of the crime. At the end of today's presentation, there'll be some information and places you can go to learn more information about the National Center, about FINRA Investor Education Foundation, and the Financial Crime Resource Center. And at this point, you're probably wondering, who is that disembodied voice talking? My name is Josh Bales, and I am the director of the Financial Crime Resource Center at the National Center for Victims of Crime. I'm proud today to introduce to you our two presenters, esteemed colleagues of mine, Hazel Heckers and Mary O'Brien. Briefly, Hazel coordinates the Victim Assistance and Community Education Program for the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and is the coordinator of the Identity Theft Advocacy Network of Colorado. Hazel has worked in the victim assistance arena for the past 25 years. She is considered an expert in identity theft and fraud, crimes against the elderly and people with disabilities, and in working with high-profile crime victims, such as the family members of homicide victims. Hazel was a key member of the committee responsible for drafting and advocating for Colorado's at-risk adults law, which defines and criminalizes elder abuse and the abuse of people with disabilities. She started Colorado's first kinship care support group and facilitated Colorado's first law enforcement protocol for response to cases of caregiver abuse. Hazel has initiated and facilitates one of the nation's only 24-hour hotlines for victims of identity theft and fraud, and has been part of the team that created identity theft and fraud training classes that serve as a model for the nation. She considers it an honor to be invited into the lives of crime victims and to join them in the process of healing, and we're thankful Hazel is here. Also, we have Mary O'Brien. Mary serves on the board of the National Identity Theft Victim Assistance Network, which works to expand and improve outreach and capacity of the victim service programs to better address the rights and needs of victims of identity theft nationwide. NITVAN, as it's called, was launched in 2010 with support from the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, and the Office for Victims of Crime. Previously, Mary served as Director of Special Grants and at the Maryland Crime Victims Resource Center, where she was responsible for administering non-direct service-related grants. In this role, she has worked as Director for the HOPE 2 grants to victim service programs targeting underserved victims, host of the 2010 National Day of Remembrance for Homicide Victims Public Forum, and chair of the Peace Coalition, a multidisciplinary elder abuse group in Maryland. Prior to this position, Mary was involved with several projects at a Michigan nonprofit which strove to improve seniors' access to food, medical coverage, and safety from abuse. Mary earned her master's degree in social work from the University of Michigan, where she received the Geriatric Scholars Award. Currently, Mary coordinates DC Trove, the district's collaborative training and response to older victims. DC Trove brings together the Network for Victim Recovery of DC, AARP's Legal Counsel for the Elderly, DC Metropolitan Police Department, the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, and Adult Protective Services to increase awareness and training and service to elder abuse victims in DC. We're glad they're here, and without any further comments from me, I'm going to turn this over to Mary to begin our program.
Good afternoon, all, and thanks, Josh. Many of you on the call may have attended a previous webinar last year, also hosted by NCBC and the FINRA Foundation, where Hazel and I did more of a basic overview of all types of identity theft victimizations. So this webinar, we really are striving to delve a little bit deeper into financial identity theft victimization specifically, and the steps you can take to address that type of identity theft in the clients that you might see. So what we're hoping to achieve in this webinar is 4 sections, the first of which is to really understand some of the barriers that the clients you see might be facing in terms of their recovery process and how that might affect them. We want to just do a brief recap of some of the basic strategies that we covered before, but then we want to move right into the heart of the presentation, which Hazel will lead, which will identify what you can do to help your clients recover step by step from that victimization. And then third, knowing that your organization can't do it all alone for your organization, the biggest important thing is to learn how to build capacity with limited grant funding, limited capacity and staff and that sort of thing to address the needs of identity theft victims and partner with others to get that job done. And then finally, we want to give you access to the latest training tools, materials, both for your clients in terms of outreach strategy, so clients know that you can help them in this, but also tools and materials that you can give clients to continue on, and self-help materials as well for clients. And then just other online resources that might help you as you continue on. We'll launch right into the first section here. Just a quick recap from our earlier presentation, and for those that weren't on that, identity theft really is much more than simple credit card fraud. Most people, the general public in the U.S. might believe that when they think identity theft, credit card fraud comes to mind. However, identity theft really is the misuse of anyone's personal identifying information, what we call PII, to do numerous types of damage, whether that be getting health insurance and then getting medical treatment, which happens to millions of people a year, or to get government services and benefits from food assistance to tax returns, to hide out from law enforcement, to get that job that otherwise they might not get with background checks, and on and on. So again, just remembering that there are many kinds of identity theft here. We're going to focus on financial, but financial has ties to many of the other types, of course, and it's very related. So just to kind of understand that, I mentioned medical identity theft. It affects, latest Ponemon study in 2011 says it affects about 1.5 million in the U.S. Of course, it has financial implications. This is a particularly tough type of identity theft for recovery for victims. Of course, many people have heard of the HIPAA regulations that can sometimes hinder the recovery process simply because people that work with HIPAA often are fearing the regulations in terms of commingling of records with the thief and with the actual victim. Sometimes those files are now commingled, and the protecting of the privacy of the thief can often actually come into play in terms of hindering the recovery of the victim. So this also can be a very dangerous type of identity theft. One thing to note, if you're interested more in this type, is to go online and find out about MIFA, which is a new group that has formed, Medical Identity Fraud Alliance, MIFA. So you can Google that and find out more about what's being done for this growing type of identity theft. I mentioned tax identity theft. This, according to the FTC reports, is very much increasing each year in terms of the reports that the FTC receives. So if you are listening to this call from Florida, Georgia, California, Michigan, Nevada, Maryland, Arizona, Texas, New York, Illinois, you, my friends, are in a top hot spot for tax identity theft. So you might see clients that are dealing with this issue. For some of our low-income clients especially, this can actually have a great impact in terms of the delay to receive returns and a lot of other things. So I just want to let you know that tax identity theft is being addressed on a national level. We had last year the first ever National Tax Identity Theft Awareness Week. There were opportunities for victim advocate groups and law enforcement and a host of others to get involved in that effort across the country and nationally. The second annual will be held January 26th through the 30th, 2015. And we'll talk a little bit more later on in the presentation about resources and how to get involved in that effort, because really your help is needed as advocates to get out the word about this and the help that's available. And then I also just want to mention this week, in terms of domestic violence-related identity theft with the news with the football player and everything you might have seen on social media. I'm sure many in the group have followed, as I have with interest, the hashtag on Twitter, Why I Stayed and Why I Left. If you haven't checked that out, it's a very interesting and compelling use of Twitter to get out the word about why people often might be trapped in this cycle of domestic violence and the barriers that people face to getting out of that situation. When I went on Twitter on Monday, when it was very hot topic there, and looked at that hashtag, one of the first I saw was from a woman that said, why I stayed. He had stolen my identity, ruined my credit. I had no ability. My finances were in shambles. No ability for my children and I to even leave the situation or have the money to do so. And then I saw others that also echoed that feeling. So I felt identity theft was definitely part of that hashtag response. It's very interesting. Okay, so just moving along. So what do we know about how identity theft may potentially hurt the victims that you might be seeing? Well, of course, direct financial losses, damage to credit score, damage to their reputation, but also I mentioned dangerous medical mistakes. They might be denied housing, denied anything from leases to mortgages, denial of employment for background checks, and I mentioned some of these others, but please consider too child identity theft, and especially in foster care situations, the loss of ability to gain independence when they age out of the system, or go to receive a student loan, secure an apartment for themselves, and generally become an adult. And then, of course, for some clients, the fear of dealing with large governmental agencies like the IRS and having a false arrest potentially or detainment. And then you all, as advocates and other allied professionals, are really going to see quite a few sort of things involved with a typical case that you might see. So definitely not just a credit check. You might be dealing with any number of these and more. This is just a small sample of what, for instance, Hazel in her practice would be dealing with, any number of these things. So what does the latest data tell us? Well, the Bureau of Justice Statistics recently came out with a report, 2013 in December. So this is the most recent report, and they've found that 16.6 million victims in 2012 of identity theft. And you can see that the majority of those were cases where the criminal misused existing accounts. So that does include simple credit card fraud, more simple cases. However, that can also mean accounts that are a little more complex, including medical accounts and that sort of thing. But nonetheless, close to 2 million, the criminal opened a new account or committed other fraud in that way. So that is quite a lot of people that are dealing with very complex types of identity theft that are far-reaching. The total financial losses for victims, $24.7 billion, and then per victim, the average that they spent in out-of-pocket costs in terms of trying to recover from this, $2,200, and 600 hours extent, and that can be calling on the phone, that can be loss of time at work where they're driving around to get things, to file a police report or get things straightened out in those ways. And then they also, more difficult situations that we talked about, utilities cut off, being arrested, erroneous claims on their health records, and so on. So one thing you hear is identity theft or victimless crime, or the bank is the victim and that sort of thing. And just to reiterate, this is definitely not a victimless crime. In terms of the emotional distress, over half of the victims were feeling moderate to severe distress from the identity theft. And just to kind of compare what that looks like in terms of total violent crime, you see severely distressing is the yellow, and moderately distressing is the bluish-gray here on this chart. So you can see that in terms of especially new account related identity theft, there are comparable, if not higher, rates of distress that is reported from the victims. So I just wanted to give you a quote here from the Experiences of Adult Child Identity Theft Victims, which is a research report by Axton Betts out of Iowa State, professor there, who looked at when children's identities were stolen for various purposes. This person's identity had been stolen for, her credit ruined, her finances completely ruined before she was even of age to use credit herself. And I'm just going to read this for folks that are on the phone only because it's pretty poignant. I apologize for the vernacular, but it just sucks what he did. As soon as I hit college, everything went downhill. When everyone's life should be going uphill, mine sank like a stone to the bottom of the ocean. It took so long to dig out from underneath. It was always just this constant never knowing what shoe's going to drop, what bill's going to come in the mail, who's going to sue me today. That's how you live your life, a state of paranoia. It sort of consumes you. And you're also never taken seriously by anyone, so when you speak to the police, they think you're lying. As an adult now in my early 30s, it's not something I think of every day. But I think of what I could be doing now at 30 hadn't this happened. All my contemporaries all have nice jobs, have jobs and nice homes. I don't particularly have that. I didn't have that good foundation to build upon. My foundation was already used up before I got there. So just to kind of consider the ripple effect on somebody's life. And then these are two victims that were served by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, Hazel Hecker's shop there, and the 24-hour identity theft hotline that's available that's quite unique in terms of across the country that's being available to victims. And these are just, I won't go through these in detail, but these are just victims, one of medical identity theft and one of criminal identity theft. And so you can kind of see the effects there. Okay, and in terms of the trauma response, just remember that, again, there could be very deep responses, just, as you might see for victims of other types of crimes, and it could all the way to depression, suicide, divorce, and so on. A feeling of paranoia because it might happen again and again and again throughout the life. Once the information's out there, Pandora's box, it doesn't get closed again. So that information might be sold and traded to other people or just used again in other ways down the years. And Hazel points out that a lot of clients she served, there's a feeling of, there's no justice for me in this situation. Feeling like they are, again, repeatedly seeing this issue, that the person's not being arrested, nobody's taking them seriously. And a lot of times, unfortunately, we as victim advocates, as law enforcement, as other professionals dealing with victims might be perceived as part of the problem rather than the support we should be. So let's say a victim calls their bank or a company and it's told, you're not the victim, the bank is. I know in a simple credit card fraud situation I dealt with, I was told that. So how many other victims have I heard from that were told the exact same sentence, you're not the victim? So how disempowering and offensive is that? And then, of course, law enforcement, if people refuse to take a report, or if a victim advocate doesn't have time to deal with this type of, or simply is uninformed about how to deal with it, and so on. So how can we change this? How can we provide a more compassionate and confident response? Just to kind of recap from our last webinar, we discussed 4 basic strategies: stopping the imposter in their tracks, reporting their crime in various ways, not just to the police, but there's other options to add on as well. Repairing the damage, that was caused, and then preparing the victim for re-victimization. So I just want to point out that that step is last. Re-victimization often happens, but I will tell you in a lot of places what happens is a victim comes maybe to see a victim advocate and is handed a brochure that only covers preventing identity theft. Maybe that's all that somebody has to offer a victim or knows that's available to offer a victim. And so maybe the lesson that a victim might take away is victim blaming, essentially. Looking at that and thinking, oh, so I should have done something to stop this identity theft. And while it is helpful to prepare for re-victimization, I just want to frame it like that. The victims you see, they've already been victimized here. So making sure that we frame it in that way and that we do address what happens after the victimization and not just, preventative measures only. And then we also just frame this in terms of two basic things. Number one, paperwork. Keep clear records, keep documentation, encourage the victims to ask questions of those they're talking on the phone with, keep detailed notes about contacts, and we'll delve deeper into that in the advanced section. And then also working collaboratively, making sure that you cover your bases in terms of getting trained on this, making sure that you can't go it alone in your communities on this issue, and that it really does pay off to work collaboratively. And again, we're gonna delve into that more in section 3. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hazel to launch us into part 2.
Hello. While I'm waiting for Mary to turn that over to me, I'll just introduce myself and tell you that we just had our fire alarm go off, so hopefully you're not hearing that in the background. There we go. Looks like I have it now. So, okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about response. I am being told that there is a fire alarm, but I'm going to keep going until someone tells me I have to leave. So I'm going to talk a little bit about response and what you can do to help victims who have been victims of specifically financial identity theft. There are many types of identity theft, and this is just one response to one type of identity theft. And I want you to know that we are going to talk about it as if it is relatively simple. It's not. It's quite complicated, and it's not as easy as it appears. So please know that while we go through this and we talk about this, we know that it's not going to be as easy as it seems. And I do have to say, I am not able to do my screen, and so someone is going to have to move it for me. Excuse me one second. I'm in the middle of presenting a webinar. Okay, thank you. Apparently we have a fire in our building, so that may be in fact. Mary, could someone else please help me in moving these slides forward?
Yes, I can. And if you need me to take over at any point, too, if there's an emergency, please feel free.
Okay. I will make Mary the presenter here so that she can change the slides for me. So thank you, Mary. So credit reports. One of the things we want to do is talk to you about how to read a credit report and to understand what it shows, what it does not show, and when you need to take some kind of further action. Okay, I do apologize, but Mary, I am going to have to turn it over to you because apparently this is not just a drill, but there is something going on in the building, and so I need to exit the building.
Yes, okay. We'll hopefully talk to you at the end then. Okay.
Okay, I will come back in if I can. Thank you.
Wow, okay. Sorry, everyone, and hopefully everybody's safe here. Okay, so like Hazel said, we're going to talk a little bit about when you're looking at a credit report, what are you looking for, and what is actually contained on the credit report. And so what you're going to see, on the credit report might not include everything that you need to know about the identity theft. You're not going to see criminal identity theft issues or medical identity theft issues. You might not see opening of new accounts that didn't require a credit report to open those accounts. So, you're also not going to know just from the credit report who the thief is. So that's not necessarily going to identify that person. And like I mentioned, ID theft is not financial in nature. So it is limited in terms of getting to the bottom of the story of the entire victimization. And so basically you just want to keep that in mind, and when you're working with the victim, know that you might have to check all of those other types of information on the earlier slide, some of which may be involved. And we're talking about warrants, employment history, driving records, vehicles, student loans, so on. So, okay, so in terms of first steps, and again, in our earlier slide of stopping the imposter activity, first steps. First steps, you really want to make sure that you do obtain credit report from all 3 credit reporting agencies, which you'll see a lot of times referred to as CRAs in any of the literature. So obtaining the credit report from all 3, you definitely want to get a hold of those so you know the information you're looking for. You want to make sure that you help the victim report to law enforcement. And in some areas, there's different laws about whether the victim can file a police report in the area where they live in or where the crime occurred. And I mentioned sometimes victims having a difficult time getting their police report. And a lot of that might be due to, well, quite a few things in terms of law enforcement agencies being very busy, or, the opening of a report and then having that in their open case statistics. So there's a lot of issues around why victims might have barriers to getting the police report. But a police report is extremely helpful because it allows victims access to certain rights that you'll see later in the presentation won't necessarily be afforded to them unless they have that identity theft report in their hands. And like it says here, some businesses will actually require that police report to absolve the victim of the identity theft. And I will note that identity theft is a interesting type of victimization in that the victim is often in the eyes of the companies and that the new credit has been opened and so on, they are seen as guilty first and innocent when they prove themselves innocent, unfortunately. So you can imagine how frustrating that is. So you also might want to tell the victims to report to the FTC, to the Federal Trade Commission. This is optional, of course, but it is extremely helpful because the identity theft report, as a definition, entails the police report and the FTC ID theft affidavit. I'm going to talk about what that's about in a second, but those 2 pieces comprise what's known as an identity theft report, which then the victim can keep in a nice, neat file. All of their information will be in one place. The FTC report is also just a very neat way to keep the information because as you go through the affidavit process, which you can do with the victim online, or the victim can call the FTC and there will be an operator that will help them through that. And then that will be either mailed to them or they can print it off from their computer if they're doing it online. And like I said, it's just a very neat compiled way to make sure that you've answered all the questions that you might need to answer about the identity theft that's happened. So just for the victim's record-keeping purposes, it's a very helpful thing to have and helpful to have to show people later as needed throughout the recovery process. So there's a number to be able to fill that out, but we'll also later show you the web link to get to it as well. So I greatly would recommend that. Another benefit to filing the report with FTC is the FTC, the data that I showed you earlier, well, that comes from the Consumer Sentinel, which is comprised of reports that people have made to the FTC. So the more that we know about identity theft, the more we might, have funding, first of all, to help victims, but also just, be able to, identify the issues that are coming up. And the types of identity theft that are arising. In some cases, too, communities that have partnered to become to have access to the Consumer Sentinel data, which any law enforcement agency in the country can contact the FTC, and they actually send someone out to train the agency for free. And there's a whole process of being able to access that database in a secure fashion. Those communities can then see where there are hotspots or rings of identity theft that have sprung up. and they can tackle those larger issues in their communities in a more effective way. So a lot of good benefits to doing that. And I just point that out because, you know, as a victim might think, well, how's it going to benefit me to just, you know, tell some nameless federal agency about the crime? And that is, you know, a very valid point, but I would say one of the biggest benefits to the victim really is being able to have the paperwork all in one easy place, and also be able to have a complete ID theft report that they can then exercise their rights as a victim with. But it's not like the FTC is going to follow through the case or be a case manager for the victim. There's no follow-up process that the FTC takes after that. So making sure to manage the victim's expectations are very important in terms of that process. Okay, so in terms of placing the fraud alert and the credit freeze, a lot of people ask me about these two. A lot of people confuse the two things. A lot of people assume that everybody should immediately place a credit freeze, or everybody would want to place a credit freeze. Some people proactively place a credit freeze, and that sort of thing. So I get a lot of questions on that, so we're going to talk a little bit more about those. But basically what you want to do when you're looking at the credit report with the victim is determine, you know, which entries in that credit report are fraudulent and part of the identity theft situation, and then beginning the request for corrections to the report and blocking of that information. Then also responding to the collections actions that may have been taken, and then finally requesting that the creditors give the correct documentation back to the victim to, confirm that they have made those corrections and those blocks that have been requested, all of that. So note about fraud alerts. Fraud alerts are good for 90 days. They're renewable up to 7 years. But basically what they do, they entitle the victim to an extra free credit report beyond what a normal consumer could already, achieve. So you can contact the credit reporting agencies. These are the numbers here for the 3 major credit reporting agencies, and to get those free credit reports from each of those. And this fraud alert lets it's letting the credit reporting agency know that a fraud may have been taking place and alerting them to that fact. Now, a credit freeze is a more drastic step, but it might be a very good step for many victims. But it's similar to two-step verification of passwords online. There is going to be more hassle associated with the situation if the victim does want to open up new credit in their name, unfraudulently. So basically what happens is the victim requests in writing from the CRA that they would like a credit freeze. If there's no police report, there may be fees associated with that. But if the victim has the identity theft report, then the victim should not be charged for the freeze. Now this is going to block all new credit that would be run by the CRA. So this might not block credit that doesn't, basically that would be extended to them through other means. So in not all cases, new accounts are run through CRAs. So maybe a heating bill may or may not be run through a CRA, for instance. So it's not the be-all and the end-all, but it can be very effective for, let's say, the thief then goes into the local car shop and tries to buy a new car. Well, that car shop is going to call and check the credit. They're going to be told that there is a freeze on that, and then there's a process by which the victim will have a special password only associated with them that only they know in order to temporarily lift that freeze and get the credit that they need. So again, a little bit more hassle, but it can be protective. Okay, so disputing the fraud that's happened. Oh, okay, very good. I think the fire department has put out the fire and Hazel is back. Okay, I am going to make you presenter again. Okay, very good.
Okay, I still don't know that I will be able to forward the slides, Mary.
Oh, that's okay. I can handle that. Yes, I'm glad you're back. I was a little worried about you and flustered throughout the entire I was hoping that everybody was safe there, so I'm very glad they put it out. But okay, so I'll forward the slides for you if you'd like.
Okay, thanks. So I caught the very end, and I do apologize. We have some construction going on one of the floors in the building, and they caught something on fire. So we all had to exit the building for a few minutes while the fire department got the fire put out. So woohoo for our fire guys. And I understand that Mary just kind of went over the freeze and the fraud alerts. I don't know if she said this, so I apologize if it's a little bit repetitious. But I always encourage people to put on a fraud alert immediately, because the fraud alert can be done over the phone and it can be done immediately. And that gives someone a little bit of protection until they put the freeze on, because the freeze has to be done in writing, and that takes a little bit more time. So at least you're protected by the fraud alert while you're getting the freeze placed. In some states, the freeze is free, but unfreezing and refreezing, there's a cost involved. So that's something that you want to talk with people about. If there's someone who's trying to get a job or trying to get an apartment or is in the process of refinancing their home, something like that, they don't want to do a freeze, or if they do, they want to do a very time-limited freeze. And there are some tricks for getting around paying a lot of money to get it unfrozen and refrozen, like asking your employer or your landlord or the loan company which credit union they use or which credit company they use, and then only unfreezing that one and then freezing it again. So that way you're only paying for one instead of paying for all three. So one of the things that you need to be aware of is that when you have been a victim of identity theft, you need to dispute everything in writing. And it's very important for the victims that we work with to make sure that they understand that they need to send letters to all three of the credit reporting agencies. They don't necessarily have to have something show up on that credit reporting agency's list in order to send a request or a dispute to that agency. Sometimes one business will report to Equifax, but they won't report to TransUnion. But you want to send the same letter saying, somebody opened a Capital One account in my name. It's not mine. I'm a victim of identity theft. You want to send that to all three credit reporting agencies, even if it's not showing up on TransUnion's. That way they'll know that if it does show up anytime in the future that that was fraud. So you want to make sure that they send the dispute letters to all three credit reporting agencies. They also need to send a dispute letter, and it can be the exact same letter, to the fraud department of all the creditors that are inaccurate, even if the account is in good standing. I have a lot of people who call me and they say, you know, someone's been using my credit, but they haven't done anything bad yet. They're paying on time. They've actually improved my credit score. I'm really excited about that. It's still a fraudulent account. And what the ID thief is doing is building up your credit so that they can get a larger amount of money out of your credit account when they decide to stop paying. So we always tell people to make sure that they send to all those creditors. Okay, so the next slide, please. So when you send your dispute letter, you don't just want to send off a letter. You want to help the victims get together a cover letter that explains the situation. Now, this is something that the victim can write, or you can write it on the victim's behalf and then attach it to what they're doing. So that cover letter really needs to explain, I'm a victim of identity theft. There are some things that are showing on my credit report that do not belong to me, and I need to have that fixed. You want to attach a copy of a police report, and then if they did the FTC affidavit, they can attach a copy of that, and then they'll need to provide some proof of ID. Now, most credit reporting bureaus require 2 forms of government-issued ID. Some of them will tell you to send the original. You tell your victims, never, never, never send the original. They only send a copy. So their state ID or their driver's license, a copy of a Social Security card, a copy of a birth certificate, and if they are a parent or if they are someone like, if you're a caseworker who's working with a foster youth, you would want to provide some verification of your guardianship status or whatever your legal status is that allows you to act on that person's behalf. Okay, next slide. So your dispute letters have to say a couple of things. And they have to say it in the language that the credit reporting agencies understand. So they must state that you are a victim of identity theft. They must say that the credit report is inaccurate because of the identity theft. I know that people have sent things saying my credit report is inaccurate and I've been a victim of ID theft, and the credit reporting agency has said, oh, that's nice. So if the letter says I'm a victim of ID theft and my credit report is inaccurate because of the ID theft, then they start paying attention and it goes forward a little bit more easily. You have to request that the inaccurate information is blocked. Most of us would say that the inaccurate information needs to be removed, but the credit reporting agencies understand the word blocked because that's what's in their legislative requirements, not the word removed. It means exactly the same thing. And then I always suggest that you request a verification of the actions that were taken. And I usually tell people, you know, you can look on a lot of the websites that have sample dispute letters and some of those guides that have sample dispute letters, and they don't include this step. But this step is really important. I want someone to tell me, yes, I've taken care of this. So next slide, please. So there are some sample dispute letters that can help you with this available in an online program. This is a great program. You've got the website down there, the identitytheftnetwork.org/gethelp, and it will take you to some sample dispute letters that have been designed specifically for your state and the laws in your state. So it's a really nice resource to have. Not everybody likes following the little avatar around and doing step-by-step, and there are some other options. One of them is the Federal Trade Commission. They have a book online that has sample dispute letters in it. CBI, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, we have some sample dispute letters that we've written and would be happy to send out to you. And then a lot of other advocacy agencies and possibly even your bank or credit union will have some sample letters that you can use. You know, they're fill in the blanks. It's always nice to have a go-by so that you're not starting from scratch. And these are some great programs to do that. Okay. So when you're requesting verification, there's a couple of things that you want to ask them to verify for you. That the account is, that they agree with you that the account is fraudulent and does not belong to you, the victim. That the victim is not liable for the debt, that they know the date that the account was closed, and the date that the account was removed from all three of the credit reporting agencies' records. And you also want to have them say that the creditor will not sell or transfer the loan. So if I'm a creditor and I'm stuck with this loan, I might decide, well, I can't collect it anymore, so I'm just going to sell it to somebody else to collect it for me and at least get a little money on the sale. But they are, under law, required not to do that, and you want a verification of that in the letter. Okay. So once the credit reporting agencies accept that the ID theft report is true, they must, and this is under federal law, they must block the fraudulent information within 4 business days. Now, this throws a lot of victims off. They'll send the letter in on Monday, and they'll expect things to be removed from their credit report by Friday. Once the credit reporting Bureau receives the letter, they have a right to do an investigation to determine if they will accept it that it is identity theft. Once they've accepted it, they have 4 business days to block that fraudulent information, or in language most of us would use, to remove that from the credit report. And then they have to notify the business that credit belongs to the creditor, that the block has occurred and that they have found that it is identity theft. Okay. And then once the business has been notified, they also by law are required to do a couple of things. They need to stop reporting the information to the credit reporting agencies, and they cannot sell or transfer that debt for collections. Okay. So it's really important to obtain documentation of what has happened. And this is something that I think is really hard for victims to do. You know, they've blocked it from their credit report. It's not affecting them anymore. Why do they need to take this extra step? And what I like to tell them is that taking this extra step is what's going to tell us in the law enforcement field who it is that's stealing your credit. And so you will contact the fraud departments of each and every creditor and request all documents that are related to that account. the most important ones are here: the documents that were used to open the new account, the documents that were used to charge purchases, the details of where and when the fraudulent transactions took place, and a copy of any application for credit or a loan that includes signatures and copies of any IDs that are used. These are really helpful. If we know that somebody was using a fraudulently obtained Home Depot credit card on April 6th at the Home Depot in such and such a city, we can go to that Home Depot and see if they have any kind of video surveillance or anything that would help us identify the person who did that. If we have a copy of an application that has a signature, it's easy to compare to the victim's signature and say this wasn't that person. If we have a copy of the IDs they used, that might help us identify further who the person is who was using that person's ID, and it certainly proves that it was not the victim. Okay, next, please. So documentation must be sent at no cost to the victim within 30 business days. So that means that after the business receives the request, they have 30 business days to send that information, and they cannot charge the victim. They often will try to, but they cannot. If the victim is working with law enforcement, it might be easier to allow law enforcement to obtain those documents. They may be able to do it a little bit more quickly. It just depends on the laws in a particular state and how much freedom the law enforcement agency has to request that information, how quickly they can get a court order to produce documents, how quickly they can do that sort of thing. But it may be a little bit easier to let law enforcement handle that. That's something that a victim and you serving as a victim's advocate should discuss with the investigator in the case. Okay. And then there are a lot of things that may show up on the credit report that these dispute actions will not cover. Bankruptcy, investment accounts, foreclosures, and fraudulent student loans. If there has been a bankruptcy that has shown up on someone's credit, they should go through the same process to dispute that showing up on your credit with the credit reporting agencies. But because bankruptcy is something that is filed through the court systems as opposed to credit that's just obtained through a creditor, that victim will need to go to the bankruptcy court and ask that that information be removed from their Social Security, or that their Social Security number is removed from that court case. So it can be quite complicated and something that you definitely want to have assistance with from somebody who's accustomed to doing it. The Federal Trade Commission, somebody from the NITBAN organization. You can always call us here at CBI, and we can kind of walk through those steps with anybody who's interested in that. Investment accounts, again, you need to notify that account holder in addition to doing the process with the credit reporting bureaus. Foreclosures may not always show up on a credit report, and the foreclosure may have no immediate impact on the victim's credit. But when the victim goes to get a house or something like that, that foreclosure is going to have a big impact on them. And the process of getting the Social Security number removed from the foreclosure starts with finding out which bank issued the initial mortgage on the house and issued it fraudulently under the victim's Social Security number. So that can also take a lot of time to go to that bank, find out what process that bank has for removing a Social Security number and proving identity theft, and then following through with the steps at each of the places that that mortgage was sold, whether it was sold to another bank or sold to someone like Fannie Mae or something like that. So that's important to know that that is another procedure that victims will have to go through in addition to the traditional disputes. And fraudulent student loans that are handled through the Department of Education require you filling out certain paperwork for the Department of Education to have your Social Security number removed from those fraudulent student loans. And unfortunately, everybody has their own set of paperwork, and everybody wants things done in their own way. So this is just another thing that may show up for a victim that they would need to have some additional support to have that done. Okay, and then debt collectors, kind of the evil debt collectors. So when the debt collectors start calling, there's a couple of things that victims need to be alerted to tell that person. The first is tell the debt collector to stop calling. But just saying, don't call me anymore, doesn't make them actually go away. You need to say, stop calling me because this debt is due to an identity theft. I am not the person who checked out this account. I am not responsible for it. Stop calling me. But then you also want to ask them to flag that account so that it's ID theft and to say that it is being disputed. Then the person needs to write to the debt collector and include everything that they've just said to them verbally in a letter. And then they need to call and write to the initiating business, to the business who originally gave out the credit, whatever credit card company or loan company it was, and say all of those things. Hey, I've been a victim of identity theft. You sent this account to collections. The collection agency has been calling me. This is not my debt, and I would like to know what you're going to do about it. Okay, next, please. So when you notify the debt collectors that a debt is related to ID theft, that may not stop the debt collection agency from continuing to sue you for the collection of the debt. So there's a couple of steps that you can take. Most of the time, if you are able to prove to them that you are working with law enforcement and that you have reported this as identity theft, they will remove you from the civil suit. But if they don't, you can always request mediation. And in a mediation session, you would just go before a mediator who is an impartial third party and present your case as a victim. It's great to have a victim advocate or somebody else go with you because it's a terrifying process. Most of us who work in the system are accustomed to going into the courts and to dealing with these things, but the majority of the victims with whom we work are not accustomed to this, and it's quite a scary process for them. So requesting that mediation is really helpful, and then going with the person is helpful. Usually it can be resolved there, but if it's not, it's really important that the person seek legal representation, because going into a collections action without legal representation can be really, really hard. Most states have some resources within their legal aid or legal services to provide some assistance for victims of identity theft in these fraudulent collection actions. And then you want to get all the documents together. All that stuff that you asked for when you requested information from the creditor, you want to make sure you have all that prepared and ready to go to court. This is where it's going to be really helpful to have that signature and that picture of the fake ID that was used so that you can say, see, this is not my signature. This is not my driver's license. This was not me. Okay. And I know we talked about this earlier, but it just bears saying again. When you are a victim of identity theft, it is really, really important that you document everything. Victims of other types of crime do not need to be as concerned about documenting as victims of identity theft do. I think the only other crime that I would say where you have to be as concerned about documenting is stalking, when you are trying to prove that you are being stalked by someone. And this is pretty much the same thing. You need to keep documentation of everything. Keep a record of all the calls, the letters, the reports. Make a photocopy of everything so you've got two of everything. Send emails as a follow-up to a phone call so that you have a written documentation. So you talk with your you really encourage victims to do this, and then you can help them too. If you talk to a victim on the phone and you said these are some steps, send them an email. Right afterwards it says, hey, we just talked about these things. You said so-and-so told you this, so that they have a record of that conversation. And then encourage the victim to do that when they speak with other people, when they talk to a creditor, when they talk to a debt collector, to send an email to follow up that conversation. And to say, please respond to this email and let me know that you agree this is what we discussed. So sending those read receipts and a response is really helpful to verify that you did send that email and they did get it. And always, always, always getting the name and the title of the party that they're speaking with. That's not always so easy. Some people won't give that, but they will usually give an employee ID number or something. So I think that's really helpful. And then when they mail anything, to send it certified mail. I know this can be expensive, especially if you're mailing a lot of information out to a lot of different agencies, and this might be a great time to access some of those resources for financial assistance to help the victim through this. But really, sending certified mail is the only way that you can get verification that somebody received the information that you sent. Okay. So I don't know if you want to stop now for questions or just keep going. Not seeing any.
I think, Hazel, we have a couple of questions here if you'd like to quickly address them. The first one is, do you have a particular brochure that you recommend for victim advocates to give to victims of identity theft?
Well, I think that it really depends on what your particular agency does. If you have a brochure that's specific to identity theft, I think that that's probably great. If you'd like us to review it, I know that I would be glad to review it. I don't know if I can volunteer Mary for that as well, but
Yeah.
I think that we'd be willing to review it and say, yeah, this is great. One of the things that Mary had mentioned before, and I just want to make sure that you all are aware of, is that sending somebody a brochure after they've been a victim that talks about preventing identity theft is not helpful. While they may be an ongoing victim and they may be re-victimized, and those prevention tips will be great, just saying, well, here's a brochure on preventing identity theft doesn't help once you've already been a victim. So if you do use a brochure, it should say, we're sorry that you've been a victim of identity theft, and here's some things that we can do to help. I don't know, there are so many different forms of identity theft that sometimes it's helpful to send a letter that may be specific to the type of identity theft. I'm sorry that you've been a victim of financial identity theft. Here are some resources for you. And I would certainly be happy to send anybody some of the things that we send out to crime victims if you'd like. And referring people to the FTC's website is also really helpful. Or NITBAN's website. There's some great information on that website.
And we'll have some slides on that coming up, too, so folks don't have to jot down links themselves quickly. You'll have that in a few slides to come.
Okay, and so we have one other question I want to cover now, and then we'll grab some more a little bit later. But for the panelists, at which point do you most recommend contacting a creditor specifically to dispute the charge? For instance, is it better to first immediately call the credit card company and then watch for more problems before taking any other action?
Well, I think that there's a couple of places where I would say you would do that. If you notice that there is something going on with your credit or with your credit card, I encourage victims to report that immediately. You have to stop the bleeding. If someone is using your credit card, you need to let that person know immediately that your credit card is being used fraudulently and that the credit account or your bank account needs to be closed. And then you need to call the police. It's really rare that I say call someone else before you call the police, but in this case, you need to stop that before. It's like going to the emergency room before you call the police if you're bleeding to death. You want to get to the emergency room. In this case, you want to call the creditor and get that stopped and then report it to the police. If you've found out, if you've already discovered you're a victim of identity theft and you find some fraudulent things on your credit report, then certainly after you have notified law enforcement, you immediately want to notify those creditors. So you want to do that sooner rather than later.
Okay, thanks. And folks, you can continue to submit questions as Hazel and Mary move through the next section.
Great. So building your organization's capacity, it's really important to understand that you've probably seen all this and thought, oh yeah, well, you're either thinking, oh my God, no way, I could do all that stuff with all of my other job responsibilities, or you're thinking, oh, it sounds easy, you just send a few letters. Well, the truth is it's very time consuming, it's very difficult, and financial identity theft is the tip of the iceberg. It is really rare that someone has just that going on, and so there will be other things that you have to do too. So there's some things that you can do to help victims. So next slide, please. One thing is that you can understand the process before you try to lead a victim through it. I will tell you, getting your credit report, understanding your credit report, and disputing something on your credit report, they are not easy. And so if you don't know what you're doing and you're just trying to flounder your way through it with a victim, that can be really, really challenging. So you want to really understand what the process is before you try to help someone else through it. And fortunately for you, maybe you checked your credit report and there's nothing on it, so you don't know how to do the dispute. So talk to one of us who's done a few of them, and we can help you talk about the pitfalls and what might happen and what the challenges are. And then the other thing is to establish contacts in the community who are going to be there to help. most of us in law enforcement have not, unless we've worked in financial crimes a lot, we have not forged really close relationships with banks and credit unions. But I will tell you, they are an incredible support and an incredible help. They want their customers to have a healthy financial future. And the only way to do that is to make sure that their credit is correct. So banks and credit unions can provide a lot of information. Many of them have classes on credit and understanding it and how to dispute things that are not correct. So banks and credit unions are a great support system, and they can really help. I have had a lot of victims that I have said, well, call your credit union, call your bank, see if you can get an appointment with a personal banker and see how much of this they'll help you with, and then call me back. And then the call back I get is, hey, my bank is going to help me take care of all of it. So, you know, they're great. Financial advisors in your community are also great. Knowing the credit card companies in your, that your clients may be working with, knowing their fraud departments, that can be really helpful. And then knowing which attorneys in your community provide low-cost or pro bono legal services to victims of identity theft, especially in collection actions, that can be really, really helpful. Okay. Now, there's a couple things that I think we don't often consider when we think about recruiting volunteers. For most of us working in the victim assistance field, when we're recruiting volunteers, we're looking at recruiting people with a lot of compassion and a lot of understanding about the human psyche. So we may be looking at PsyD programs or other criminal justice programs, but we may not be looking at the financial sector. With victims of identity theft, we want to look at the financial sector too. So we work with a lot of retired volunteers. We have retired bankers, fraud investigators, retired detectives, a few retired prosecutors and attorneys. We have a couple retired entrepreneurs and small business owners. And we actually have one retired IRS employee who helps out our victims when they're having troubles with the IRS. These are people that we could never afford to hire in a million years, and that the victims would not have easy access to, or might not even be comfortable accessing. IRS employees are not exactly warm and friendly, at least most people think they're not. But when you have somebody who's working at an agency that's designed to provide victim assistance, who has this expertise, it's amazing how quickly they can help people get through some of those roadblocks. And then this is just a tip that I have for you is if you have a grant that requires volunteer hours as matching funds, and many of us do, a lot of us get funding through like VOCA or something like that, you might be able to count specialized volunteers at a higher dollar rate per hour than the average volunteer hour. So because we use specialized volunteers when we do our matching funds, a lot of our grantors will allow us to match at the going rate for that person in the community. So when we use a retired attorney to help somebody prepare to go to a mediation, instead of doing the $18.95 an hour or whatever the average is for a volunteer, we're able to count them at $195 an hour because that's what they commanded when they were in private practice. So, you know, that's great for your agency. It really helps you get that matching fund number up a little bit higher. But it's also great for the victim because you've got somebody who did this for a living for a long time and has that expertise. And that way you as a victim advocate don't have to be an expert in everything. Okay. And then I want to just take a minute to talk about some of the things that have been going around in the news lately. Identity theft and fraud have been directly linked to global organized crime activities. And you've probably heard about this a lot in the news lately around Russian organized crime and that sort of thing. What we know is that identity theft, well, we call it identity theft because someone has stolen your identity. A lot of what happens with that stolen identity is that it is trafficked. So not only is there identity theft, but there's also identity trafficking. The identity that somebody has stolen is used the same way that any other commodity that can be trafficked is used. So it's sold, it's resold, it's sold on the black market, it's sold on the street corners. It is used as a commodity, and it is trafficked both within a state nationally and internationally. We do see this happening globally. We also know that there are direct ties between identity theft and human trafficking. So people who say identity theft is a victimless crime or identity theft is a white-collar crime, they're crazy. There is a definite connection between identity theft and human trafficking. Stolen identities are used to traffic people in and out of the countries. They're used by the traffickers themselves. Identity theft is part and parcel with the drug trade. And what we know is that identity theft and particularly fraud, scams, have direct ties to terrorist activities and known terrorist organizations. Organizations like Boko Haram and ISIS and the Al-Qaeda's use fraud, perpetrated scams perpetrated against mostly Americans to fund some of their activities. They'll do a romance scam or a credit card theft, and those dollars that they have stolen from that are then used to fund their activities, their kidnapping activities, their terror activities against Americans. So they are using us against ourselves, or using our finances and our identities against us. So next slide, please. Okay.
We have one additional question here that says, it's from Alicia, where should we send our fact sheet for financial abuse recovery for review?
Our emails will be displayed on, I think, the second to last slide. And I think participants will also get the slide deck probably. So, but you'll see that on the screen.
Absolutely, yeah. You'll be able to. Folks will be able to get those emails at the end, and we'll have access to the slides as well. So how about we continue on? If we have any other final questions, we'll address them at the end.
Okay.
Okay, so our final part, we're going to give you access to resources. We talked about a victim brochure, so learning where you can access all of those. The good news is there are tons of good things online that are free for the taking that you can rebrand and use at your agency very easily. So, or you can, also change and alter to meet your needs. So the first of which our hosts on the call developed, along with a whole host of stakeholders that they brought in to create this guide. So it's a very good, comprehensive, I call it the Advocate's Handy Desk Guide to financial crimes, because it's got very quick, easy to read. Your eye focuses on the page very carefully. You can keep it on your desk. And this is the Taking Action Advocate's Guide to Assisting Victims of Financial Fraud. It's free. Anybody, you can go online and they'll send it to you. They can send you 20 if you need to, and you can make sure that every advocate in your organization has one on their desk. So if this comes up, at least you have this and can just flip to the page you need. I have a picture, a screenshot here, so you can just see how handy it really is for advocates. So at the very least, please, everybody on the call, get a copy of this. And Josh is also going to talk at the end about how to do that. For lawyers on the call, there's also a handy desk guide designed specifically for you. Now, this is also something that advocates could definitely enjoy and benefit from too. But this guide for assisting identity theft victims that the FTC has come up with is specifically designed for the legal field. There's a lot, all of what we talked about, Hazel and I, in terms of the recovery steps when we said this should be free for the victims. This is what they need to do. All the reasoning behind that, the laws, and referring to those laws and knowing why and how those have been developed is all in this guide. So if there is any trouble where in complex cases a lawyer needs to refer to those or let other people know, hey, this is the law, you need to provide these rights to this victim, all of that would be in this guide. Also, we mentioned the sample letters that you could then tailor to your community a little bit too. Those are all in here as well. There's an entire appendix that just has sample letters for all sorts of needs that may come up. So definitely this is a great resource, also free, also able to order it or access the entire PDF online and just bookmark it at this link you see on your screen here. Okay, now let's move along to resources for your clients and also outreach materials. So making sure clients know that you can help them on this outreach, and then once they do come in, being able to give them materials that they can take with them. So FTC is the go-to for this. They have an entire wing of people that create very good, splashy, easy-to-read outreach materials that make it as clear as possible for victims. So on your page here, you see a screenshot of their website. They have sort of this microsite, ftc.gov/ID theft, which contains all sorts of things you might need to know. There's YouTube videos, what is identity theft, all the way up to more detailed YouTube videos. And then you see the link there, free resources. You also see below it Guide to Assisting. That's what we just saw on the previous page, the Guide for Lawyers. So all of that is found there. Now the free resources, like all of that, you know, as it says, is free, but it's also you can. They don't mind and they encourage you to co-brand with them. So what that means is if you want to print out some, you know, Avery labels of your agency's logo and your agency's phone number or email address, and you want to put that label right on the front of those or on the back of those materials that you can order for free from them, they encourage you to do that. So if you want to include in there some additional information about your local resources, staple on or stick in the center, you know, another leaflet for that, you can do that and send that out to victims. And then there's also different kinds of resources for different situations. So there's resources specifically for tax identity theft, for instance, and so on that page for victims to have, and that you can print from the page or you can order from them on their bulk order page that you can get to from this page. Now there's also various links. So if you have in your front office a stand-up display cabinet that you have all of your flyers in and various things in your community, and you really just want a trifold or you want a palm card, just the front and the back, they've got various formats. Now, one thing they have, though, that is a little more comprehensive is this taking charge type booklet that also can be given to the victim. That is, I want to say maybe 20 pages or more, but it's again very easy to read. Takes them through the process, the steps to recovery in a way that's hopefully not as overwhelming as it could be. So I definitely recommend that. You also notice here there's a scam alert button, so you can sign up for scam alerts on this page as well. There's a few other other agencies that also do scam alerts, so that can be very helpful. They have a blog as well, so if you're interested in, what do I have to look out for? How are these criminals kind of changing their, of course their methods kind of seem to stay the same, but how are they changing the game, in terms of their specific tactics? Then you can go in and kind of see on the blog what's coming down the pike. So for instance, when tax identity theft time gets to be at its peak, there'll be a lot that comes about what you can do on that. So you can see on the left here, promoting awareness. They give you sample blog posts. So if your agency has a blog, they give you sample presentations complete with all the slides that you might need to give a presentation in your community to other advocate groups on this issue, or to other people just in your agency. Downloadable flyers. They even have sample tweets if you have social media at your agency where you can just copy and paste those, and they totally encourage that. Anything can be begged, borrowed, and stolen from this page, and that's what they want you to do. So I can't say enough good things about that. Now I mentioned
and before you go on,
sure.
Mary, one of the things that I want to mention about the FTC is that they have a lot of specific issue brochures. So if your business or your agency does something specific to a certain type of identity theft or specific to a certain type of fraud, or you see a lot of that coming through, like for example, if one of you online is a tax preparer, and so you would be seeing mostly the tax stuff, or somebody else might work specifically in the healthcare field, they have things that are specific to that issue. So you can get copies of those little booklets or brochures that are specific to issues that might be really important and pertinent to your clientele. And they're free. You can get quite a few of them. They've got a couple of books that they put out about safety online, a parent's guide to talking to your kids about safety online, a kid's guide about being safe online, one that's geared towards younger kids, one that's geared towards teenagers. Those kinds of things are really good things to have in your lobby, even if you don't do specifically identity theft. But if you are a child advocate or work at a child advocacy center, or you work with foster parents and you're teaching parents about working with kids, having some information that helps talk about identity theft and introduce it, coming from you as a trusted source, makes it a little bit less scary for your clients.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay, and I mentioned that they also have the fraud alerts, but AARP also offers a Fraud Watch Network website, and this, a lot of times, and maybe Maple agrees too, I don't know, you find when you go out into the community to do presentations or even to fellow advocates, you get a lot of people wanting to know about the latest scams, and I mentioned that, you know, some of the methods that are used and the general types of scams have been the same since the 40s probably, but so knowing about the methods and the overall ways scams are perpetrated is actually more important than knowing, let's say, that this one is called a Nigerian prince scam this week, or, you know, next week it's called something else. So I would definitely just encourage you to sort of know about the general ways that these things happen, but a lot of times you will get from the audience or from, you know, fellow staff you might be talking to that they have specific questions about something they've seen in the news that's happened. And they'll oftentimes want to, you know, the conversation might get sort of waylaid into more specific things and consumer scam type information. So you can always just point victims to this page. You yourself can get these watchdog alerts, they're calling them, and just, you know, have those coming to you in your inbox if that interests you. And it is good to know about what's happening and what's going on. And then also for professionals that are interacting with identity theft victims, there's sort of a support network, and that's the Identity Theft Victims Assistance Network that Josh mentioned I'm on the board of. Those are the links for that, identitytheftnetwork.org, and also the Facebook page. This is a group that's made up of a variety of coalitions and networks and alliances across the country, statewide groups that you see here. So if you live in one of these states, you can go online and learn how to contact your state's group and join that professional group. But you can also just go online to our national page that rolls up all of the various work products that these coalitions develop. So for instance, you know, Hazel's group developed quite a lot of materials to train law enforcement, roll call trainings and longer trainings and so on. Some of the groups created a lot of training for foster care parents and for children, and also for people that are social workers helping those groups of people. So those are just a few examples of some of the materials that these groups have created that you can access. But we also have done quite a lot of trainings on these topics, so all of those are recorded and on our YouTube channel and are available. So you can go to those pages and see, and you'll get links to that. And also on our page, we talked about before about how in your state there might be, you know, there's a lot of federal laws, but in your state there might also be specific laws related to identity theft that you might want to just have a good understanding of before you go into helping these clients. So to get to those laws, you can go onto our website, and there's a clickable map that you can click on your state on the map, and what you'll see is everything from does the local police agency have to take a report if the victim lives there, or can they have the report be taken where the crime occurred, or both, or, you know, that sort of thing. All of those details for your particular state will be there. Can a victim of identity theft get restitution? All of that. So you'll be able to see that, and also resources in your state. So this agency has told us that they are accepting identity theft victims to serve them. So that their contact information and numbers will be up there. Now, if you go to that site and you don't see your agency and you do have specialization or want to help these victims, let us know, and we'll add that to the page. Also, any other updates that you might see. We mentioned the sample forms that can walk a victim with that avatar you saw on the page down to completing a form to dispute the identity theft. So that also is accessible all on the same website. Okay. All right, and I just mentioned this. So these are some of the things that would be there. Some states have an identity theft passport law, you know, and so on. And then there's also related laws too, you know, regarding data breaches and other things sort of related to identity theft, I would say. Okay, so let's say you come out of this webinar and you really want a very in-depth training. You want your staff to go through an in-depth training, or you have new staff coming on that you think, you know, could benefit from this, from a longer training. OVC does have supporting victims' financial and emotional recovery from identity theft. It's a lengthy training. It's interactive, free, and they complete modules online, and they go through that process. And they would set aside a good amount of time for this, but it's very, very in-depth, very good. So just to round up all the links that we mentioned and maybe a few more, okay, also including the Identity Theft Resource Center. ITRC has a ton of great material online. They also have some good data. They have good blog posts about what's coming down the line in terms of trends and things that we see in the media and that sort of thing. So definitely check out their website as well. And with that, I will put up our, and I believe you'll get these slides too, so I'll put up our, oh, well, before I do, hold on one second. I do want to mention before I go that OVC also, in addition to the training that I showed you on that page, they also have an identity theft rights booklet that you can also download and be able to give to victims that lets them know what their rights are under the federal law as identity theft victims. So that's one more thing I wanted to mention. And with that, we can take the rest of the questions, and also you guys can have a chance to jot down our contact information.
And just to piggyback on what Mary said about that brochure that you can get with victims' rights, it's important to understand that these are federal victim rights and may not apply in your particular state. So it's important to talk with your state's, the people whoever it is in your state who is doing your victim's rights amendment and knows all the details of that, to see if those rights would apply to a victim who is a victim of a state crime that had occurred in your state only. So I think it's just important not to have victims have an expectation of something that may not work for them if it's not a federal crime.
And also, to go back to this page too, to go along with that, this might be a helpful jump-off point too, to kind of figuring out, you know, what the laws are saying in your particular area in terms of, is there a mandatory police report law in my area? What are the specific state rules around obtaining a security freeze and so on? So, that can definitely be a starting point. Okay. There we go.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Hazel and Mary. I think I have one question here left, and it just asks, are any of these materials available in other languages?
Oh, good question. The FTC has made a great effort to have most of their materials, and in fact, the entire website you saw there, translated into Spanish, and also other languages as well in terms of some of their brochures. But definitely for Spanish-speaking victims, you can even direct them to that entire website. They have a separate sort of microsite, and if you go on that site, you'll see a link to it. It'll be pretty easy to find.
And it's even really easy to find for somebody who is monolingual Spanish-speaking, because if you want this page in Spanish button is written in Spanish. So that's really helpful. I think they have quite a few of their brochures translated into Vietnamese and a couple of other languages as well.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, answering that question, and thank you all for your outstanding sharing of information. Both of you are not only experts, but just great people, so we really appreciate you sharing the information. And Hazel, for fighting through a fire alarm. You were quite poised considering what was going on around you, and you were going to keep going even though there was a fire alarm, which shows dedication that I'm not sure I have. So thank you for that, and thank you both for sharing. I do want to let everyone know that this webinar will be available in recorded form, and the PowerPoint will be available for download within 7 days on the National Center for Victims of Crime's website. Also, we invite you to download a copy or to order a copy of Taking Action, an advocate's guide to assisting victims of financial fraud, which has identity theft information in it, and was developed in concert with folks like Mary and Hazel and input from them. So we encourage you to download that on FINRA's website at saveandinvest.org/fraud center. There are many other resources there as well pertaining to investment fraud, but you'll find Taking Action there. We also want you to be aware that you'll be hearing from us about some future webinars coming up. They won't necessarily be on identity theft, but will be on other forms of financial crime, including elder financial exploitation based webinars, which will happen beginning this November. So we have lots coming up in that regard, and we'll be in touch about those. And we also are working to produce checklists so that folks have a handout they can give that goes along with the guide. The guide is designed for advocates. We'll have checklists that you can actually give to individuals who have been a victim of identity theft or investment fraud or lending fraud or mass marketing fraud. And those checklists we will hopefully be able to also translate into the Spanish language as well as we work through adding several different languages to this resource. We again thank you for spending an hour and a half of your time with us. We hope that this has been helpful to you. We look forward to any feedback and of course are always available to you for any of your resourcing needs. So thanks a lot for being here, and all of you have a wonderful afternoon.